Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Two Friends Film Podcast. My name is Brian, and I'm back here with Fowler. Say hello.
Hello, I am here and I am ready to defend one of the greatest action films ever made in
Yes,
American cinema.
that is his opinion on that front, but we are here to discuss Conan the Barbarian, made in 1982, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and James Earl Jones. Um, so, first off, Fowler, do you want to hit us with a nice little summary to give us a starting point to go from?
Sure, Conan is a medieval fantasy revenge story following Conan, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. He is the sole survivor of a brutal ambush on his village by a sorcerer cult leader named Doom, played by James Earl Jones, who kills both of his parents. Conan spends his childhood as a slave. He's later trained to be a gladiator, for personal amusement as a slave. And then he escapes and decides to devote the rest of his life to finding Doom and murdering him in revenge. Conan befriends and works with Valeria and Subbote, who are two fellow kind of wandering warriors. All three are paid by King Osiris to bring back his brainwashed cult member daughter back to him. Uh, so they show up at Doom's evil villain mountain fortress. Um, Conan kills Doom and all of his men, but Valeria, who has become his lover, she sadly dies. And then, with revenge satisfied, Conan takes the reward money from King Osiris and he uses it to make himself a king and then becomes famous as a legendary conqueror.
Yeah, so a very basic sort of story, not many twists and turns. But
Much like a great country song, as many of them use the same archetypes and symbolisms, sometimes it requires even more skill to take a simple, done story and make it great than having one that is unconventional in other means.
I will say the fact that you are twisting. Listen, I'm going to come out and say this. This is the first film we both genuinely disagree on. I think this
Mm.
film is not that good. Fowler
This
thinks
film
this
is a
film.
masterpiece.
Yeah, Fowler thinks this film is fantastic. Um,
It
Now
is one of the deepest action films ever made.
that is
It
a
explores God, religion, ideology, gender roles, and in a fundamental way, power.
it's just a wild take. Okay, we're gonna get into it though. So, I'll just talk about a little bit about the strengths that I like. They're few for me, but there are some things I do like. I genuinely do like the atmosphere and the music. It accompanies that theme really well. It keeps
The
that,
music is excellent. It's very operatic almost. It's super
yeah,
formal, but it for some reason it fits the kind of weird medieval setting.
yeah. It's a weird aesthetic, but it works for the aesthetic they're going for. And
Mm-hmm.
even though the plot is rather basic and stuff like that, it is it I think for me it works still for what it's trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's not trying to do too much with what they have. Now on the counterpart though, actually before I get
Do you want to
into
do all the strengths first, and then we'll do all the
yeah, before
weaknesses?
I get into that, yeah, you want to talk about this some of the strengths you have as well, because that
Really,
was
that's the only strength.
I literally did not like this film. I don't know what to tell you. Um, I it was really the music and the atmosphere that did it. I think a lot of the other things I have a lot of contentions with, to be honest.
You're like the European monarchs who listened to Mozart for the first time and did not understand his genius.
Oh my
There are many things to
god.
love about this film.
Oh my fucking
Uh,
god.
there are many things that we can love about this film. The dialogue is minimal. The story is mainly driven by action and the music. But what dialogue there is, it is witty, funny, philosophical, and deeply profound, particularly from Doom and Valeria. They have a couple great bangers. This is a very quotable movie. Uh, this is a very campy movie, but it's camp done correctly,
No.
and it never breaks immersion.
Okay. I first off, that's a contention I have. I think it's camp done poorly because it is a campy film that is also like an adult oriented film. If you're gonna go camp, right? Like think of like the fucking Goonies. The Goonies is a campy ass film made for kids. Why the fuck would you make a campy ass film for adults?
You can make campy films for adults all the time.
Okay,
The
well,
Evil Dead. What's the one with Tim Curry who plays the alien
oh,
transgender doctor surgeon? That's not a movie for children.
is that it? No, that's not it.
No, no.
I don't know.
Um, Clue is not for children at all. And Clue is one of my favorite camp films, perhaps my favorite camp film.
I just feel like it.
Camp doesn't have to be a device that is for children. You can use it extremely competently with adults as well.
For me, it strikes like a tone of like not working in either category. Because like Conan the Barbarian, it's not like from my understanding of the comics. My father's a huge Conan the Barbarian guy. They're like made for kids. They're like not like kids or teenagers. They're not like this heavy sort of handed shit. Uh, Whereas the movie like makes it extremely violent, extremely like sexually aggressive and explicit. So I feel like it's one of those things that it's kind of like taking its target demographic and just disregarding it. You know what I mean?
I would argue that Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, a film comparable to Conan the Barbarian in terms of quality, also
Oh my
takes what is largely a child franchise and makes it extremely adult. It's a risk, and certainly this film takes many risks, but I think it's a risk that ultimately pays off and makes this film even more iconic.
wild fucking thing to put the Dark Knight and this film in the same breath. Uh,
This film is better than The Dark Knight Rises by far, and it might be better than Batman Begins.
that's that. Well, like Batman Begins. Batman. We're not talking about that film, but like, okay. So all that aside, though, I do have like a lot of contentions with this
I
film.
have other strengths to this film, though. I'm
Okay,
not done.
okay, go for your strengths then. Keep going.
Unparalleled world building for an action film. Okay, um, which has benefited from the constant traveling in numerous locations that the characters go that really let them explore the world. Uh, One of the things I particularly like about it is that the costumes, names, symbols, and places that they encounter come from a wide variety of cultures. There's Nordic influences. Conan and Valyria both believe in the Valhalla warriors heaven the Vikings did. Valyria literally gets the Viking funeral pyre burial. There's Mongolian influences. Subutai is Mongolian. He's named after Genghis Khan's greatest general. Many of the outfits are obviously Mongolian. There's Egyptian elements of it too, with some of the outfits of Doom's death cult. He literally worships Set, who is the Egyptian god of chaos and destruction. There are many elements of Christianity. Um, Conan is a Jesus figure. He metaphorically is resurrected when he goes into the cave to find his sword, and then he comes out of the cave, and then he's literally resurrected when he is crucified by Doom, and then he comes back to fucking life. Doom is covered in serpent motifs. Like he had his symbol is a serpent. He has serpent based powers. He can turn himself into a serpent. He can create arrows out of serpents. In his corrupted, manipulative nature, it's very reminiscent how snakes are perceived in Christianity, with the snake in the Garden of Eden. And just like the snake from the Garden of Eden, he targets women very specifically for his cult. There are Arabic influences with the priest outfits, the camels. Doom's secret mountain fortress and warrior suicide cult are obviously callbacks to the Hashasha during the Crusades that defended the Holy Land against the barbarous Europeans. Many fantasy stories only have a couple cultures, but there is a mosaic of culture in this film, and it
I
feels incredibly real.
I
Oh,
just
also, costume designs and sets, they got drip, they slay,
yeah.
also enormous amounts of variety.
Okay, yeah, I will give you the fact that the costumes are fucking badass as shit, like really cool. But I all to go back to your point about like the different cultures like represented in it, don't you think for like a fantasy sort of genre, wouldn't you want to see them branch out from something other than real world examples? I mean, obviously, like, you have your influences, right? Like, with Tolkien, you have different, like, sort of races of creatures who are mirrored after different races and ethnic groups within societies, right? But wouldn't you
Yeah.
want them to see them branch out and make more shit up rather than, like, use from real world sort of examples?
I think that the real world examples benefit from some of the themes because ultimately one of the things that Conan does, it's an exploration to the relationship of man and ideology, and having this mix of religions and cultures and sort of military styles. I think benefits that strategy. I think it's a calculated, brilliant choice by an excellent film.
Hmm. Okay,
Those are my strengths.
those are your strengths. So,
I admit there are some weaknesses.
okay, what are some weaknesses in your eyes? Because like I said, I have plenty of here to talk about.
There's too much telling instead of showing. The unnecessary duration doesn't matter. And also, there's a lot of points where they state things that are just self evident. There's a lot of babying of the audience.
Yeah,
Um, the acting is terrible, besides Doom and Valeria, who are actually fantastically acted. This is largely mitigated by making Arnold Schwarzenegger basically say nothing, and most of the other characters mainly being eye candy. So I think that they mitigated that acting weakness cleverly. The special effects are terrible. Maybe that's just the time period, but the snake arrows, the
well,
giant snake that Doom has a pet, Doom's supernatural abilities,
you
the
you,
ghosts that
you
pop up,
have to keep in
they're atrocious.
you have to keep in mind this was also 1982, which came out with our both of our favorite science fiction horror film, The Thing. So, like,
Would have
special,
no excuse.
yeah, no excuse there. Like, what the fuck? Like, but no, like,
uh,
okay.
I have three more.
Well, I was gonna
Sometimes,
say I agree with you on the voiceover thing, though.
yeah, not good.
Yeah.
And it's a very smart film. The acting, besides Leary and Doom, pretty terrible.
Sorry, you cut out there for a little bit.
Do you agree that the acting, besides Doom and Valeria, were not good? And would you argue, as I do, that Doom and Valeria are
No,
actually
no,
well
no. I
acted?
would agree that the acting is like kind of subpar for a lot of it. Like, but like I said, Doom's acting in it, like, fucking James Earl Jones. Holy shit, dude! Like, what the fuck?
He's great. He has a very weird, campy role, and he's intimidating as shit in it.
You,
There's a scene where he's just losing his shit. He has this fucking line where it's like, I will make you remember why you fear the dark. I will make you remember why you fear the night."
yeah, no,
And it sounds like a line that like Bane would use.
yeah, no. I was picturing fucking Tom Hardy's Bane just like fucking shouting that as he's beating the ever living piss out of Batman. You know.
Okay, so um, I will admit that the characters are cliched, and I
Hmm.
will admit that that there are a lot of sort of conventional narratives.
Yeah.
Um, I think this is a deliberate choice, and I do not mind it. But I admit that it is true, and in some places it can be problematic when it never critically evaluates those things and it takes them at face value. I would also say some of the themes are excellent, but some of them are contradictory. Um, so
Do you
those are my
okay?
critiques.
Like, I have a couple things. Like, we already talked about the campiness, like how it feels like it's two different sort of appeals. Like, with the campiness and the voiceover and the sexual nature of it and the violence, how those feel like two different elements, right? Like, it feels like appealing to two different demographics, those being like younger sort of audience and older sort of audience, which I we talked
I
about.
don't know. I think a lot of really great queer films are both hyper campy and wildly sexual.
Mm, mm, yeah, well, we discussed it, but yeah, um, but then I also said, like, that some of this movie could have been chopped out. I feel like there are a lot of scenes where it just fucking drags. Like, the ending feels like it drags on forever. Uh, you know.
Ending is slow. Yeah, I would compare it to Lord of the Rings, which is another great film that sadly its ending was not ideal. But I think I didn't mind the slowness because I think that's why the world building was so good, was that we really got to travel around the fantasy world and see all these different cultures and peoples. And I think a lot because the themes are complicated and there's many versions of the themes across time as Conan's perspective changes. I think the length of the film is necessary because this is like a very brainy philosophical action film.
I like, but there were also like scenes in it that I was just like, why are we doing this? Like, Conan's like his love interest, right? She dies, and then she comes back as a ghost to help him in the like one of the final battles. You know, which is just
That was
fucking.
great.
That's fucking what? Like, why? Why is that great?
We will explain with the themes, but it makes sense within the context of the story and the philosophical argument that this film is attempting to make
Oh,
about the nature of power.
okay. If you say so, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, then there's like also an orgy scene in the middle of it, and just a lot of weird, unnecessary sex scenes. Like I don't think many of them are necessary for the plot at all.
What I will say, I actually have a section in the themes called gender themes, and that's where we'll talk about this. I think that the way women are portrayed is a mixed bag. I think there's some elements of it that are actually quite good, and there's some elements that are bad. But I would agree, women are wildly fetishized in this film.
Yeah. So those are my main three big contentions there. And like I said, we'll talk about it when we get more into the themes here in a sec. But are there any other notes you want to talk about before getting into themes? Actually,
I'm ready for the themes. The
okay.
strength of this film, like any great cerebral film, are the themes, and Conan knocks it out of the park. Absolutely brilliant.
Jesus fucking Christ. All right. Well, please, Fowler, enlighten us with your take on Conan the Barbarian as it comes to the themes.
What would you say is the driving idea behind this film? What do you think it is that Conan truly desires from a philosophical perspective?
It's sex and power.
Power. What is the true nature of power? What is the means of power that allows one to have true freedom and autonomy, which is Conan's goal as it is all of our goals?
Uh,
Well, there are three.
yeah, I thought that's rhetorical.
Well, there's three ideas about power
Okay.
driven by three characters who are very well written. So, the first argument in the film regarding power is actually Conan's father. Conan's father says the power comes from possessing earthly materials, gold, gems, but mainly steel. That, he has a quote: "You cannot trust men, women, or beasts, only your own steel." The way that Conan's father believes power works is you gain it through your armor, through your swords, through your gold, through your jewels. And the father there dies at the beginning of the running of the movie by Doom, a man who does not value steel as a means of gaining power. His steel sword literally loses against Doom's war dogs who rip him apart, and Doom's underlying philosophy about what power actually is. Conan's sword, which is the best steel, it's literally an ancient blade that he finds in a fucking royal catacomb from hundreds of years ago. That shatters to pieces fighting Doom. So that's another point where the father's philosophy of power loses. Um, the father's idea that you just trust steel and not people, that's also totally full of shit. And we know this by Valyria as a character. Valyria helps Conan all the time, even when it doesn't benefit her materially. She redeems him spiritually as a person by teaching him about love and companionship. She guards his body when she could have easily just gotten the fuck out of there when, he's recovering from dying from crucifixion from those evil ghosts. And then her spirit joins him in the final battle against Doom and is the primary reason that he actually lives and manages to avenge his family. And of course, King Osiris challenges this as well. He says, like, there comes a time when a throne room becomes a prison, jewels and gold lose their luster. All that matters is your love for your daughter. So obviously, the father, power does not come from steel. Then we move to Doom, who has the second philosophy about power in this film. Doom believes power comes from people, namely controlling them. He openly dismisses the power of gold, jewelry, and steel. He has a great quote. what is steel compared to the hands that wield it? That is Doom's philosophy about life. That by controlling people, you then control steel. He uses animals like snakes and dogs to kill his enemies. He's not himself a great warrior, but he doesn't need to be. He uses his charisma and manipulation to brainwash an enormous amount of people who fight and kill and die for him. Uh, Doom is a master, both being a cult leader and being a manipulator. He promises his followers throughout this story sex, comfort, the meaning and truth of the evil world that they live in, immortality by belonging to something greater than themselves. And it's another reason why Doom is drenched in all that snake symbolism, the original silver-tongued corrupter of the Bible. Doom Doom is a corrupter. He does not require literal power in the way that is, Conan's father does. He he can do so through that subtle soft power. And Doom is also proven wrong. Given the context of the story, I think it's more nuanced in real life. He dies at the hands of Conan, a man who he is not able to manipulate and control, who has no cult or army to back him up, no people power really to the degree Doom has. And he is assisted by Valeria's ghost, who is not human and not able to be manipulated by Doom. His people based strategy fails. He is killed, and his philosophy of power is shown to be false. And finally, Conan's philosophy of power. Power comes from one's inner strength, which is molded by suffering. Conan is not strong because he's good at manipulating people or he has the best gear. He's strong because he overcame enormous personal adversity, child slavery, being in the gladiator pit, warfare, coming back from the dead. That is what makes him strong. And his inner strength allows him to defeat opponents who both have better steel and also have more people. And that is the nature of power within this film and how it is masterfully displayed, challenged, and ultimately decided.
So, in your eyes, right, the whole movie is just a metaphor for how to gain and use power and how successful you can be with it based on these three characters.
I mean, that's one of the two big themes, but certainly power is an extremely important backbone of this film.
I just like it's one of those films where I think you could really take a deep dive like this on it. But at the same token, just be like, looking at it objectively, it's basically a popcorn film, right? Like, I don't view it
So
as.
is The Matrix, but The Matrix also discusses destiny, fatalism, man's relationship to technology, what is real sentience, and our relationships to ourselves within a larger society, particularly when it becomes bureaucratized. The best philosophical films are those that reach the audience. I reject the idea that you have to read Hamlet or uh, Euripides in order to reach the true meaning of the human condition. The greatest thinkers, their ideas are communicable to anyone in the public. And certainly, Conan is the embodiment of great philosophy hidden under great common man theater.
It's. I don't know. It's just interesting because I don't think, like, thematically, I do agree with you. I think there's a lot of different themes at play. I think power. I think the themes you brought up about autonomy, gender roles, things of that nature. There's a lot of things to be discussed here. It's just like it's one of those things where it's the same reason it's hard for me to take you seriously when you talk about Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Great film, also a masterpiece.
Yeah, it's the same thing. So for us to watch this,
Possibly the greatest film that doesn't involve gay people and the exploration of sex ever made. And it's an action film too, by the way. Another great film that's unparalleled in its philosophy, Men in Black. Just the first one. The other two suck.
okay, well that's fair. Um, okay, fine. So you have that, but you also talked about with me the importance of autonomy. So can you speak a little more on that as well?
Yeah, so Conan is, as a character, he is a glorification and the embodiments of sort of individualism as like a philosophical context. And we can see this by his relationship to authority and also his relationship to ideology in general, whether religious or political. Um, Conan's people, they worship steel, like the metal, but that steel was not given to them voluntarily by their god, Crumb, as a gift. It was stolen and then they repurposed it from Crumb. And steel is the perfect embodiment of that kind of individualism. Steel comes from the earth, but it's fashioned by men's own purposes. It's a powerful metaphor for Conan's entire life philosophy. We begin in the ground and we end up in the ground, but it is our time above in the in between that decides who we are and what our worth is as a human being, and that's our choice. That's not God's choice. And um, you can also see this in Conan's only prayer to Crumb in the entire story right before the finale, where he asks for Crumb's help, but also says that he will curse him and abandon Crumb if Crumb does not help him kill Doom. Conan's relationship to authority and also Crumb, it is not blindly fanatical or devoted, it's practical and critical. Conan backs authority figures when they serve him. He challenges them when they're wrong, and then he doesn't have a problem rejecting them if they fail. You can also see this in Conan's relationship to his father, which is also deeply independent and critical. Conan respects his father, but when he realizes that his father's view of power, the power of steel, when he realizes it is wrong, he forges his own philosophy, which not only challenges his father's ideas about the world, but really his entire people's. And Conan also is not in any way like some sort of proselytizer. Conan doesn't necessarily believe in any sort of singular authority or truth. You can see this in his relationship to Sabbatai. Conan worships the earth god Crum. Sabbatai worships the sky god, the Four Winds. And this doesn't hurt their relationship, and there's no attempt for Conan to show Sabbatai that Crum is actually the true divine god of the world. Everyone is free to believe what they believe. It's the embodiment of sort of an individualistic style. And in terms of ideology, this is mainly demonstrated through Doom's death cult, which shows kind of the sacrifices of valuing any particular belief over oneself. Joining Doom's death cult gives you enormous benefits. You get sex, you get comfort, you get money, you get a place and a purpose in your world, but you lose a lot of things. One thing you lose is the loss of self. The women in Doom's death cult, they give up their freedom, their autonomy to control where they go, what they do, their ability to think independently. Everything about themselves is sacrificed for the greater good of the cult. It's to such a degree that Doom can order members of the cult to kill themselves, and they will do so, even if it's senseless. And Conan, this ties to Conan emotionally and psychologically as a character because he's a former slave who's totally controlled in every element of his life. He understands more than anyone why freedom and individuality are essential. There's a powerful scene at the beginning of the film where one of Conan's jobs as a slave was the Wheel of Pain, where he just pushes this big fucking spoke endlessly in a circle. It's a pointless task that traps him, stops him from learning about the world or himself, and he doesn't get any benefit from it. The other thing that Doom's cult does is it destroys all of your relationships, your personal ones. And this ties to Doom's snake theme. Snakes eat their children and also themselves and each other. Not only do Doom's cult members literally engage in cannibalism, they separate themselves from humanity itself, but Doom forces them to abandon all of their friends and family for him and the cult. King Osiris's daughter, she abandons her father, her kingdom, her community to follow Doom. And this also contradicts Conan's primary loyalty. Conan is not particularly loyal to any nation or king or god. His loyalty is his devotion to his friendships. And there's a scene where he and Valeria are talking, and she says, "Even the gods cannot keep us apart." And that's the embodiment of Conan's relationship with ideology as a thing. Is there is no greater power that matters more to him psychologically than just the friendships and romantic relationships he has.
I it's just like one of those things where, you know, as myself being observer, you have a persuasive way of discussing these things, right? Like you are a persuasive person, but I know there's a part of my brain that's just like it it doesn't work on a lot of levels. And like it's not themes. Like I think the themes are probably the strongest thing of this piece, right? It's all the weird technical elements of it. It just that's my main contention. And I guess
What are the weird technical components?
like we've talked about, I mean, the things that I've been saying with you know, the sort of special effects, the weird ghost sort of scene, orgies, like sex, all that sort of shit. Like, and I think a lot of those things don't really help elevate the film.
But they're distractions. The use of sex and wealth as a means to abandon your autonomy in order to go into those other things and abandon that individualism that Conan ultimately rejects. All of the orgies and all of that stuff, it's hedonism, and it's also the benefits of tying yourself to something larger than yourself. Like the film is very hedonistic and over the top and sensationalist. Some of it is just to give it common appeal, but I think it works thematically because it's the things that draw others into Doom's hands, and it's the things that Conan ultimately rejects that make him the hero of the entire story.
Perhaps. I mean,
I'm
like,
not for unnecessary violence or sex if they don't suit a useful utility. Like if that was the case, I would agree with you. But I don't think that Conan is a story where the sex and violence are necessarily separate from the themes of the story.
I guess for me, it's just, you know, and I'm not squeamish or prudish in any sense of the word, but it just seems to me to be sort of eye candy for the audience. And but again, this isn't a criticism of your themes because I think your themes are pretty spot on. I think for me, it's just like I feel as though they're kind of just put in place there for the audience's benefit, right?
We can move on to gender if you want. Are there any other things besides the sex element that you find ruin the film?
I mean, those are like the main ones. I mean, obviously we talked about special effects and how some of it's kind of garbage, but like that was the main thing. I mean, like, yeah, let's move on to gender and talking about that.
Okay, so we'll start with men, I think, and then go into women because this film is too old to involve gay people or non-binary people. I would agree with you. The weakness of the film thematically is men are portrayed in the worst, most toxic, masculine way possible. Now,
Yeah.
this is true for basically every action film, but in this case, it's particularly egregious. Uh, Conan never cries or demonstrates any real emotion or
Mm.
drive besides rage and horniness. He does not respond to or grieve to his mother's death, the death of his entire people, any of his sexual encounters, or even like the love of his life, Valerian's cremation, who literally saved his life.
Mm.
Um, Violence is hyper glorified. Violence is the answer to literally all of Conan's problems. Anytime he's like, I will respond to this with extreme unprovoked violence, there's no consequences. He's totally correct, and it benefits him. He has a great quote from Genghis Khan about crushing your enemies and hearing the lamentations of their women, which is hideous. And explicitly, the narrator says that Conan, as a gladiator, enjoyed murdering people, that killing is the central core of his identity. Um, and then, of course, like the idea of Conan's idea of power, that it comes from inner strength. His version of inner strength only comes from physical adversity and conflict. It doesn't talk about mental, emotional, intellectual, spiritual means of achieving any of these things. And then, Conan fucks every single woman that he has a chance to, regardless of how consensual it is or whether they are an evil witch that means to destroy him. So yeah, Conan is sort of the embodiment of everything you don't want in a man. But I will point out, I think that this makes sense within the context of the story. We're talking about a medieval warrior society in a time of great adversity, and it's also a revenge film. Like the genre itself is not going to really preclude one to being like an emotionally sensitive, well developed character. Like he's not living in the right era. And I think by definition, if you decide to engage in like devoting your entire life to a wild revenge fantasy where you sacrifice everything else to achieve that goal, you're probably not very emotionally self-aware, bright to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So like I was saying though, but to also counter your point as well, the who is the main actress? That not her name,
We'll
but
talk about that with women.
okay. But yeah, I mean there are some caveats to what you're saying because women are showed at least in that instance as having some strength. So
No, let's just talk about the men first, then we'll move to the women. I think
oh,
women are more of a mixed bag.
okay, but okay. So yes, it is a very toxically masculine film, what have you. I just like for me, it's one of those things that yes, you're correct. It makes sense given the error and everything like that. I just feel like it's one of those things. Like I said, it's a popcorn movie, right? It's very much like one of those ones you put on, you have some fun with, and you don't really think about the bigger sort of themes or issues in it because you're too distracted by uh, the sort of you know sex and violence aspect of it, right? So I think it
I think great artists can use the sex and violence to achieve their goals. I think the embodiment of this is actually the Matrix. There's so many stupid popcorn elements of the Matrix. The fact they all wear fucking sunglasses even though it's nighttime in 90% of the film. The fact that they wear these like weird leather jackets and outfits that like even like a stripper working at a gay BDSM club wouldn't wear. The fact that they use katanas and other sort of melee weapons against essentially superhuman, like androids that are like carrying firearms. There's a lot of very dumb elements of that film. Also, the fact that they make Neo Superman at a certain point in the story, like but I don't think that distracts from the deeper philosophical points of the Matrix.
I
And
mean,
obviously, of every piece of art, there's a spectrum of how much people understand it versus not. But I would say that the Matrix, like that's the cost of making kind of a lowbrow thinking man's film is that you understand that some of the audience will never get it, but there's a lot of people who will understand it who would never read like a more art house version of your story.
okay, but be real with me right now, Fowler. Like honest with me. Do you think most people looking at Conan the Barbarian are like thinking about power dynamics, autonomy, as well as gender roles in society while they're watching a film like this?
How many people do you think watch The Matrix and understand that it is a deep, interesting contemplation about what it means to be human and how you can maintain your humanity in a modern, technologically complex society?
I would say not the majority.
But I would argue that it's still worth it because there are many people who will consume these medias who will think about it. Maybe not to the depth that they could potentially, but I'm totally fine with culture that's kind of focusing on people who don't. It's why I'm an enormous proponent of Oprah, and she's one of the only celebrities that I would basically like sell my children into slavery to meet. She's the master of this, master of bringing complicated artistic, philosophical, spiritual, and emotional ideas to kind of an audience that otherwise would not be exposed to them.
Well, that is a hell of a statement there. Um, I
Oprah
get
is my god.
Jesus Christ. Um, all right, so I guess would you want to talk about how women are portrayed in this film, or do you want to still talk about the men for a little bit longer?
We can talk about women. Okay,
Okay.
the bad. Enormous amounts of non-plot related nudity and objectivization of women. There are at least three sex scenes. Only one of them is really necessary. I don't think there's a single woman in the film who is not at some point naked, scantily dressed, or used as an object. It's a male fantasy, not only in terms of power, but also sexually. That's the more overt thing that I do find disgusting. The second, more subtle part is the overt paternalism. They try and show that Conan is a good human being by making him gentle. Like when he's bedding that sex slave, he wraps her up in furs and lays her down on the bed kind of softly. Um, he bounces and leaves Valeria when he initially attempts to murder Doom, despite the fact that she's like just as good as him, and he's totally fucked about her. And I think in the time that it was made, like that wasn't necessarily bad. Like women are to be protected and coddled, and you're supposed to be a gentleman. But within a modern context, it's enormously misogynistic and also deeply paternalistic.
But I don't even know
Uh,
about that because like Alien came out before this film, and Alien portrays a like woman in media 100 times better than this film, right?
yeah, but I think Alien is like one of the greatest films ever made, and this is just like top tier, top 50 best films ever made, and also
Top
one of the greatest
50?
action films ever made.
Top 50.
This is an amazing film.
This wild, wild take.
But the good.
Jesus.
So the good. Actually, there are a lot of strong female characters in this film, and granted, they're masculine presenting characters. They're not traditionally feminine, but their power is real and it's independent from any kind of man or sort of status. We'll talk about Valyria later, but the witch I think is a great example of that. The witch temporarily physically overwhelms Conan. Them having sex is not viewed as like a conquest. Like she very obviously tricks him, manipulates him, and controls him. She's a fucking shapeshifter. She can see into the future, and also she survives being set on fire. She's a total G, one of the strongest characters of the entire story. Valyria, equally skilled at swordsmanship as Conan, and then also Conan's kind of dumb. She's actually quite strategic and well organized. So strong female characters in this film. Some of them, the main ones. The rest of them not treated super well. Uh, Valeria herself, I think she's an amazing character. My favorite character in the entire film. Best relationship in the film of Conan, given how often she challenges him. She's the one that points out that his need for revenge is stupid and childish, and that he'll lose everything. She's the one that shows Conan that he can rely and trust others. In many ways, Valyria is the primary influence to Conan's philosophy on power. And then outside of that, I mean, she's kind of very strong. She's very powerful. She's very resourceful. She's quite witty in the film, and she's funny. She's talking about the loneliness of warrior culture, which relates to her and Conan, and how it's a world of constantly traveling and fighting and passing all these tents filled with lovers and companionship, and that Conan found this special kind of love, and that they should do everything to preserve it and keep it. And this emotional vulnerability, it doesn't lead her to being like babied. She doesn't become a damsel in distress. It's not shown as sort of a weakness. Like she has that moment with him, and then she continues being essential, and she actually saves his life afterwards. So, yeah, I would say it's kind of a mixed bag. There are definitely films from the '80s that are better on that issue, but I don't think it's entirely just like a misogynistic rage fest.
I don't know about that. I mean, there are some elements where it's like, yeah, they have those good moments with women, but like for the most part, it dogs on women. It's not like it's particularly like glorifying violence and like sort of strong arming rhetoric. And do I do genuinely think it's like one of those films that's like akin to those toxically sort of masculine action films like fucking Predator, for example, another Schwarzenegger film. So, like, do I think it's an enjoyable film to watch? Yes. Do I think it's like a good film? No.
It's definitely a film where parts of it has aged better and some of it has aged worse.
Mhm.
But I think it's still a great film that holds up. I mean, Conan is kind of a piece of propaganda that disagrees with like really my fundamental worldview. Conan is in many ways a deeply conservative reactionary film that glorifies individualism, demonizes any form of collectivism or community. But that doesn't mean, even though it is propaganda, that it is necessarily a bad film or does not have interesting points.
Well, it's very much might is right, right? And like, I as a it just fundamentally disagrees with both of our worldviews. And I think for me, I have an issue with the fact that it uses its violence and sexual nature to glorify that, you know. And that's just my general contention on it, you know.
But I don't necessarily think that a film has to be like a film doesn't have to agree with me. I can fundamentally disagree with every tenet of a film, and it can still be worthwhile to consume. You know more about films than I do, but like I'm an enormous fan of Rudyard Kipling's work, the man who coined the term white man's burden and was a defender of the British Empire and also war as a concept. A lot of Kipling's ideas, racism, persecution, genocide, um, overt imperialism. Obviously, a lot of the things he believed were grotesquely monstrous. But I think there's a lot of very interesting things to see in Kipling's work that do point out fundamental elements of otherness and glory and immortality and the nature of people and man's relationship with nature. I think you can have a film that's fundamentally wrong on really every issue that it argues while still being a very, very good film.
Yeah, I mean there are plenty of films that I've seen, like a lot of Polanski's work, right? That
I
I
haven't seen any of it.
Yeah, but a lot of his work deals with like weird sexual elements, and a lot of that has to do with him being, you know, kind of because of his whole shit going on there. Uh,
Hmm.
but objectively, like when I watched Rosemary's Baby for the first time, fucking scariest movie I've ever seen. One of the greatest like horror films I've ever seen. Or like Chinatown was also a very good like mystery sort of thriller. And both of those films have very problematic elements in them. So I'm not saying that I could, watch a film, disagree with the like problematic shit, and still think it's a great film. I can. I just think for Conan, I don't really see that as much. And that could just be a difference of both of our viewings and our opinions of it. Um,
Conan is a wildly problematic film, but I also think that it's a fantastic film. And the things that it discusses are, in my mind, dwarf the problematic elements. I
well,
think there's beautiful gems in it.
Well, I guess on that note, is there before we get into the ratings and what we would rate it, is there any other element you want to talk about before we start to wrap up here soon?
Mainly the contradictions that were not good
Okay.
and hurt the film. I'm wondering if you will have any. So Conan is free, but nobody else is in his world.
Hmm.
Um, he utilizes sex slaves where it's not consensual. He uses violence to coerce people to do what he desires. He works with a king, and then he ultimately becomes a king himself. Conan's philosophy about freedom and individuality mattering more than anyone else, that is just for him. It's purely selfish. He doesn't give a fuck about anyone else. They all have to live in their chains. Just he's at the top and he's fine. That was pretty fucked up. Uh, Conan, his entire philosophy about inner strength being true power is basically stupid, even within the context of actually this film. He doesn't win because of his inner strength. That's not what allows him to defeat Doom. He only reaches Doom because Sabote and King of Stars and Valyria help him. And then he literally only kills Doom because Valyria's ghost shows up and saves the day. Like, and that makes his victory fundamentally empty. Like, he wins and becomes a king. That's great. What are the two types of power he has at his disposal now? The steel and the power. Those are the things the entire film talks about, like actually not being true power and the people who preach those ideologies are both horribly murdered. And in getting to the throne, he loses the actual friendships that gave him all of his power. He's totally fucked. He doesn't have any. Like the film builds up like that's true power, and then by the end of the film, they're like he's a king and it's rad. And it's like he actually doesn't have any of the things that allowed him to become a king in the first place. And then lastly, there's some very problematic racial elements in that film. Uh, I find it more problematic than misogyny. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Conan is this Nordic, like ubermensch, Aryan white man who, rises from nothing. And his opposition for most of the film is really the only black man in the film. And he's, worships an Egyptian god. He's super Muslim coded. And, a lot of the enemies in the story are too. And then, there are minority characters that Conan works with, they're Asians and they're subservient to him. So
Yeah,
that was the part I thought was pretty
yeah,
fucked up.
yeah, it's definitely problematic. Like, I don't think either of us disagree on the fact that it's a fucking problematic film, right? Like, it it has a lot of fucking weird racial, sexual shit going on. That's
I
that's
think that's true for most fantasy. Like,
yeah,
I love Tolkien. Tolkien, there's some very fucked up elements of the Tolkien verse. Like
yeah.
Tolkien,
The
the
orcs are
orcs
like,
are
yeah,
literally they're Asians. And then,
yeah.
his idea of like the races, like if you're a demon or you're an orc, you're a fundamental creature and nothing can save you. And also the idea of evil and good being essentialized. Like these are deeply reactionary, insanely problematic ideas, but that doesn't mean Tolkien isn't good.
Yeah, like I said, you can have problematic shit. You can be a problematic sort of writer, director, what have you, and still make good stuff. It's just like this one for me just didn't feel like it was that good or that worthy of being in that category, right? Um, but though, so in terms of the main contradictions, were those kind of the main things you were looking at, or what else were you
Those
thinking?
those were my big three. Did you have any big contradictions?
Honestly, like beyond those mentioned, not really. I think it's weird to incorporate the sci-fi element to it, but I kind of, or not sci-fi, I'm sorry, fantasy, like sort of weird shape-shifting witch shit to it. Um, just because it felt like at times it was like grounded in that realistic fantasy bullshit, and then they brought out ghosts and all this other fucking weird shit. So
I would agree. I didn't mind Doom being portrayed as being some sort of sorcerer, but like Doom's actual power is not at all related to sorcery. It's that he's a cult leader, he's adept at manipulation and self-promotion.
sure,
So, like, I think it would have been a better film if like people constantly talk about gods and magic, but you never experience the magic yourself, and then you meet Doom and you're like, oh, he's a charlatan.
sure,
Like
yeah, no,
religion
that
is
would have
just
made
another
more
means he
sense.
uses to control people. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so I guess for me, and I guess this is where I'm good. Are you good to like rank it and talk about that?
I'm ready to rank
Okay.
this impressive,
So
fantastic
this
film.
I'll go first. So you've
Go ahead.
changed my mind slightly. Slightly.
This
But
is now the greatest action film in the 80s. I'm glad to hear you're on my side now.
no, 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 I didn't say that shit. I let me fucking finish first, please, sir. Uh I was going to say it's still a 6.5, which Fowler knows I'm a generous ranker, so that means probably a little more.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? 6.5 with test corrections. That's a good grade actually.
Yeah, if the curve is massive, what are you talking about?
I forgive you for being misguided about one of the greatest films that we've watched
Oh
together.
my god. All right, where do you put it on your scale?
In some ways, I feel like this is projection on your part because, like, you were talking about, like, will the common man understand this film? And clearly, you don't understand its
Fuck
brilliance. You
off.
were
Oh
distracted
my
by all the
god.
video.
All right, let the rank go. Where do you put it? Honestly.
Okay. This film. I would give it a 7.5, which means that I rank it above A Beautiful Mind, The Princess Bride, Kingsman, Baby Driver, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Night of the Museum, Philadelphia, and the Titanic. I would put it on the same
Wow,
rank
above the
as
Titanic. Wait, why the fuck is Titanic like a 7 on your scale?
it's a good film, but it's not as deep as Conan the Barbarian, honestly. It is equally ranked in my mind with X-Men: Days of Future Past, Inception, and Silence of the Lambs. I would say that they're
That's
basically comparable.
wild. That's crazy. All right. Well, as you can tell, this is one of those first ones where we fundamentally do not agree on the film, but that is fine. Um, any sort of final thoughts you want to leave our audience with here?
Everyone listening to this should immediately watch Conan the Barbarian.
Well, I feel like if you haven't watched Conan the Barbarian and you're listening to this, why the fuck are you listening to this? You know, you should have seen it so you can hear what the fuck we have
You
to
should
say about it.
convince all of your friends and lovers and potentially your colleagues and children to watch this film.
Probably not your children. There's a lot of sex and violence in this, to be
I believe
honest.
in the kids. They'll figure it out.
Jesus
Show it to your
Christ.
children.
No, don't listen to Fowler. Fowler has bad advice on this one. All right. Well, that's pretty much all I had. Anything else? Are you good?
No one can do this film justice, truly, but I have tried my best as just a mortal man.
Perfect. Great little snippet at the end. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. We'll talk to you here soon, and take care and have a good rest of your day. Bye now.